I was 61. I thought the worst parts of my life were already over, packed away with my ex-husband and the exhaustion of working doubles. I was wrong. My only son stood in my kitchen, the Ohio sunlight catching the key fob for his new SUV. "Don't be mad, Mum," he said, and then he handed me the eviction notice for my own home. "My name is Margaret Holloway. I am 61 years old, a part-time accountant who took early retirement because the discs in my lower back gave up before I did. I was standing in my small kitchen here in Brookridge, Ohio, wiping down a counter that was older than my son, when Daniel walked in. He handed me an envelope. It was thick, official, with a red seal from the county courthouse. "Don't be mad, Mum," he said. His voice was casual, the same tone he used when he was running late for dinner. I glanced out the kitchen window past his shoulder. His brand new SUV, a shade of metallic grey that looked expensive and sterile, was parked at the curb. It sat there like an exclamation point, punctuating the casual cruelty of his words. I slid my thumb under the flap of the envelope. I didn't need to read the whole thing. The words jumped out in bold type: "Notice to vacate. Eviction." From my own home. The home I had made mortgage payments on for more than 30 years. The one I had finally paid off just before my back went bad. The home I had signed over to Daniel 5 years ago, because he said it would be easier for the will. I looked up at him, really looked at him. He was a stranger dressed in my son's memories. He wore his work armor, a crisp suit from Northbridge Data Solutions, a perfectly knotted tie, shoes so polished I could see the reflection of my own shocked face. Those shiny black shoes were standing on the exact spot of linoleum where he'd spilled a whole gallon of blue paint when he was 10. "Why?" The word came out quiet, barely a breath. Daniel launched into a speech. It was rehearsed. I could hear the bullet points. The house was too big for one person. I was getting older, and my back wasn't good. A nice, senior community would be more convenient. They had activities. And then, the real reason. He needed the capital. He had debts. He and Kelsey wanted to buy a new house in one of those expensive suburbs near Columbus. As he spoke, the kitchen around me flickered. I saw him, age 10, proudly painting that blue splotch on the wall. I saw him running in with his first A in math, paper held high. I saw him sitting at this very table, crying his eyes out because the kids at school had teased him. Those ghosts were swirling around this cold man who was talking about asset optimization and leveraging. He made a mistake then. "If you'd signed the other papers back then, it would sell for more," he said, before catching himself. "I mean, so you'd have better options, a better facility." But I heard it. I wasn't a mother. I was a detail in his profit and loss calculation. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I calmly placed the eviction notice on the old wooden table, right next to the coffee mug I hadn't washed. "You promised?" I said, my voice flat. "You looked me in the eye and said I could stay here as long as I wanted." His gaze darted away. He couldn't meet my eyes. He pulled out his phone, a reflective black shield, and stared at it intently as if a vital email had just arrived. "You have 3 weeks, he said, trying to sound reassuring. He was trying to manage me. He stepped forward and gave my shoulder a light, dismissive pat. It was the pat you give a junior colleague who just lost a small account. Then he walked out. His shiny shoes clicked on the linoleum. As he pulled the door shut, he tossed one last line over his shoulder. "Don't hate me. Mum." The door clicked closed. I was alone. The only sounds in the house were the low, vibrating hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock over the stove. The air smelled of stale, cold coffee. I told myself I wasn't angry. Not yet. I just felt a very thin, very sharp layer of humiliation forming like ice just beneath my ribs. The next morning, I folded the eviction notice. I didn't crumple it. I made 2 precise creases, the way I would fold a business letter, and slid it into the top drawer of my desk. It was not something to be forgotten. It was evidence. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. My hands moved on their own, reaching into the cupboard, pulling down 2 mugs. One for me, one for Sam. Sam, my ex-husband, who had walked out over 2 decades ago and had never once come back. The habit should have died, but it was a quiet, stupid comfort, and a daily reminder that I was the one who gets left behind. I put the second mug back. Later that morning, I pulled the heavy metal lockbox out from under my bed. I didn't really need to look. I knew what I would find. I just needed to confirm the depth of my own foolishness. I found the papers 5 years ago, right after my major back surgery. I had signed the deed, transferring ownership of my paid-off house to Daniel. His reasoning, delivered in that smooth, reassuring voice, was to avoid probate and prevent legal troubles later. I remembered that day clearly now. He had come over, wearing a polo shirt with the Northbridge Data Solutions logo stitched on the chest. He'd spread the documents on this same kitchen table, talking quickly about estate planning and tax savings. I was still foggy from the painkillers. The print was small, and my eyes couldn't focus. "I'm just holding it for you, Mom," he'd said, his voice soft. He had put his hand over mine. "You're still the real owner, I swear." I was exhausted. I was in pain. And I was, as always, alone. I trusted my only son. I signed where he told me to sign. Now, holding the copy of that document, I saw only one name listed as the owner, Daniel Holloway. I realized I had not just given him a key. I had pulled the entire ladder up out of the hole and handed it to him. The doorbell rang in the afternoon, a sharp, aggressive sound. It was Kelsey, Daniel's wife. She swept in on a cloud of expensive perfume and the click-clack of high heels on my linoleum. She carried a small, pretty bag from a bakery I couldn't afford. "I brought you some gluten-free cookies, Margaret," she said, placing them on the counter as if she were delivering a casserole to a grieving widow. Kelsey's voice was sweet, but her words were hard. She talked about the fantastic opportunity in the current market. She talked about how stressed Daniel is with his new project at Northbridge. She was trying to paint this, kicking me out of my home, as some kind of long-term loving act. I just watched her. Her blonde hair was flat-ironed into submission. Her nails were perfect, glossy shields. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the counter, the screen flashing with what looked like stock alerts. I cut her off mid-sentence. My voice was quiet, but it stopped her. "If you don't sell this house," I asked, "you two will go broke, won't you?" The practiced, empathetic smile froze on her face. Just for a second. I saw the color drain. I saw the panic. I had hit it. She recovered, fluttering her hands. "Of course not. We just want what's best. I will find you a beautiful place. Margaret. They have activities. Common rooms." I didn't want to argue. I just walked to the front door and opened it. She took the hint, her smile tightening. after the sound of her car faded. I stood in the hallway. I went back to my desk. I pulled out a new, spiral-bound notebook. I opened it to the first clean page. I picked up a pen, and in my neatest cursive, I wrote a title at the top, People Who Remember Who I Am. It was the first dot of ink on the first page of my counterattack. I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, and the silence was filled with the echo of Daniel's words. I found myself in the living room at 3 a.m, a single dim lamp cutting a small circle of yellow light. I opened the desk drawer where I kept all the household records, stacked in folders, year after year, were the utility bills, the property taxes, the repair receipts. I saw my handwriting on every check stub, my name on every invoice. Since Sam left, I had paid for every shingle on the roof, every drop of water, every watt of electricity. Not one thin dime had ever come from Daniel. I dug deeper, into the files I hadn't looked at in years. That's when I found them. A set of papers from a bank I'd never used, North Lake Community Credit Union. It was a notice for a home equity line of credit, taken out 2 years ago. I scanned the lines, and my blood ran cold. On the last page, listed as a co-signer agreeing to the loan, was a signature. Margaret Holloway. It was a clumsy, wavering forgery. Someone had tried to copy my cursive, but they'd failed. It wasn't just a twist. It was a betrayal so deep it had no bottom. Daniel hadn't just taken ownership. He had used the house, my house, to borrow money for his risky investments. He had faked my signature on a document that tied me to his debt. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. I waited until 8:30 in the morning, my hands shaking as I dialed the bank's main number. I pitched my voice to sound confused, elderly, perhaps a little forgetful. "I'm just trying to understand my account," I told the chipper voice on the other end. "This loan, I don't remember it." The woman was helpful. Too helpful. "Oh, yes, Mrs. Holloway," she said, tapping on her keyboard. "I see your file. You came into our branch to sign the consent forms. Let's see. 2 years ago. March 14th. March 14th. I didn't need to check my calendar. That was the day of my second, more complicated, back surgery. I was lying flat in a bed at Riverside Memorial Hospital, unable to move, let alone visit a bank branch. When I hung up the phone, the tears finally came. But they weren't the hot tears of sadness or loss. They were cold, sharp tears of pure, undiluted rage. This wasn't a thoughtless son making a bad decision. This was fraud. This was a deliberate, calculated crime. I sat at my old laptop, the fan whirring loudly. I typed my shaking fingers into the search bar, Legal Help for Seniors Ohio. A link popped up, the Elder Rights Legal Center, serving Fairmont and the surrounding counties. Free consultations. I stared at the phone number for a full minute before I wrote it down on a sticky note and stuck it to the refrigerator. The next day, I made the call. My voice was steadier now. I was connected to a lawyer named Alicia Moreno. Her voice was young, but it was low and firm, with no nonsense in it. She specialized in financial elder abuse. I told her everything, from the first conversation with Daniel to the forged signature and the hospital alibi. She listened. She didn't interrupt, just let the silence sit while I found my words. She asked sharp, specific questions. Then, she laid it out for me. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, "I want to be very clear. The signature forgery, Using your asset as collateral under false pretenses while you were incapacitated. That is not just a civil dispute. That could be a criminal offense. Criminal. The word hung in the air. My son. My only child. I felt a lifetime of motherly instinct pulling me back, telling me to smooth it over, to protect him, to handle it in the family. But I was the family he was abusing. Alicia didn't push. She seemed to sense my hesitation. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, she said gently. But you have the right to know every single card that is on the table. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I looked at the family photos on the fridge. I saw the armchair in the living room, its arm held together with duct tape. I saw the faint water stain on the ceiling from a leak I'd paid to fix myself. This house was a museum of my life, of my sacrifices. I whispered it to the empty room, to the ghosts of the woman I used to be. If you can play dirty, Daniel, then I can learn to play by the rules. The weekend brought an unexpected development, a battered old sedan, the kind that runs on hope and duct tape, pulled into my driveway. It was my grandson, Leo, Daniel's eldest son. He's 19, enrolled at the local community college, and mostly communicates in grunts and one-word answers. He got out of the car, wearing a faded university hoodie, and stood on the porch, shifting his weight, unable to meet my eyes. He looked exactly like what he was, a messenger trapped between two warring camps. He mumbled a hello and came into the kitchen, refusing the soda I offered. He sat at the table, the same table where his father had delivered the eviction notice. "Grandma," he started, his voice low and cracking. I think Dad's in a lot of trouble. He told me he'd been in his room the night before, gaming with his headphones on, when he heard his parents start to scream at each other. He'd overheard the whole fight. It was about me. It was about the house. He said Daniel was furious that I hadn't just packed my bags, and then he told me the next step in his father's plan. Daniel was going to schedule an appointment with our family doctor, Dr. Evans, to discuss my mental state. He was going to try and get me declared cognitively impaired, unable to make my own decisions, to make the sale of the house quicker. Then came the twist. I was streaming my game, Leo mumbled, looking down at his phone. My mic was on. It recorded them. He fumbled with the screen, his hands shaking slightly, and hit play. The audio was tinny, muffled by the wall, but clear enough. I heard Kelsey's high, stressed voice, and then Daniel's, loud and sharp. It doesn't matter what she wants. My son's voice snarled. Once I get Evans to sign the mental papers, she has no voice. It's done. A cold shock ran down my spine, so intense it made me shiver. It was one thing to be tossed out. It was another to be erased, to be labelled insane by my own child so he could steal my home. I looked at Leo, this kid I had mostly dismissed as being lost in his video games, and realized he was the only person in the world who held a piece of the truth. My voice was steady when I spoke. He's already broken the law. Leo. I told him everything. The signature on the North Lake Community Credit Union loan, the date, the fact that I was in Riverside Memorial Hospital, flat on my back, when I had supposedly been at the bank. Leo's face went white. The casual angst of a 19-year-old vanished, replaced by genuine adult fear. He forged your name, Dad. Dad forged your name. He looked up, his eyes wide. If they find out? Grandma, that's a crime. He took a deep breath. Whatever you need. I'll be a witness. I'll give them the recording. After he left, I went to my desk and opened the spiral notebook. Under Alicia Lawyer, I wrote Leo, witness the recording. Then I added another name, Tracy, old neighbor, remembering how she'd been on the porch when Daniel had loudly promised, years ago, that I would always have this house. Leo's visit had jolted a different memory. I went to the back of my bedroom closet and pulled down a dusty box labeled Sam, my ex-husband. I hadn't opened it in the 2 decades since he left. Inside, beneath old tax returns and a few dried-up pens, I found a thin folder. It held appointment cards for a financial advisor and a few pages of yellow legal paper, covered in Sam's familiar, messy handwriting. It was a draft of a will, unsigned, never finalized. But there, on the second page, dated just before he walked out of our lives, was a single, clear sentence. It is my express intent that Margaret Holloway be granted lifetime residency in the Brookridge house. It wasn't a legally binding document, but it was proof. It was a voice from the past, confirming that this house was my home, not just an asset to be flipped. Leo came back the next day, and I showed him. He understood immediately. This is gold, Grandma. He pulled out his phone. We need to back all of this up. Now. In case Dad tries to find it. He spent the next hour taking clear pictures of the forged loan document, my hospital admission forms, Sam's handwritten draft, and every tax bill I'd paid for the last 10 years. He uploaded them all to some secure cloud account. For the first time in my life, I looked at the technology I'd always hated and saw it for what it was. It was an ally. That night, I sat at my laptop and composed a short message to Alicia Moreno. I told her I was ready to drive to Fairmont. I had new evidence, and I had a new witness. I ended the email with one sentence: I am ready to stop being the easy one. At the Elder Rights Legal Center, Alicia Moreno's office was small and crammed with binders, but it felt like the safest place I'd been in weeks. She spread my documents across her desk, the forged loan agreement, my hospital records, Sam's handwritten note, the printout of Leo's cloud file. Here is the plan, she said, her voice sharp and clear. First, we file an immediate motion with the Brookridge County Court for a temporary stay on the eviction. We'll cite your long-term residency and the pending investigation into undue influence. Second, we open that investigation. Formally. She slid a stack of papers toward me. This authorizes me to request all of Daniel's bank records, your complete medical history, and every transaction related to the Northlake Credit Union loan. I picked up her heavy pen. 5 years ago, my hand had been weak, shaky from medication, my signature clouded by a fog of trust and pain. This time, I signed my name, Margaret Holloway, on 6 different lines. Each signature was slow, deliberate, and perfectly clear. Alicia watched me, her expression unreadable. If we go forward with this, Mrs. Holloway, Daniel could lose a lot more than a house. He could lose his job. He could face criminal charges. Are you sure? I looked her straight in the eye. He started this. He was willing to put his mother on the street to pay for his new SUV. I'm just continuing the story he began writing. The motion was filed that afternoon. 2 days later, a new envelope arrived. This one addressed to me. It was a court order. The eviction was suspended until a full hearing could be held. I took that paper and taped it to the kitchen wall, right next to the original notice to vacate. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, My front door flew open. Daniel. He hadn't knocked. He'd used his key. He was still in his work suit, but his tie was pulled loose, and his face was a blotchy, furious red. He was waving a copy of the court order. "What did you do?" he yelled, storming into the kitchen. "You dared to bring lawyers into our family." I was already sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea. I didn't get up. I just looked at him. Not as my son, but as a man I was meeting for the first time. A desperate, dangerous stranger. I slid my own copy of the court order across the table toward him. "You started with the law, Daniel," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "I'm just responding with the law." He was about to shout again, but I kept talking. "I also know about the North Lake loan," I said. "The one you took out 2 years ago. The one with my forged signature on it." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sick, waxy color. This was the first time I had ever seen him truly frightened. "My lawyer," I continued, "is currently reviewing the file. She thinks the county prosecutor's office will be very interested in it." His phone buzzed on his belt. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. He finally ripped it out, saw the name, and his panic intensified. "I have to take this." He backed out onto the porch, slamming the screen door. I could hear his voice, high and strained, even through the glass. "Kelsey, shut up. I'm trying to fix it." A pause. "What do you mean, bungled?" "If this gets out, I know you lose your marketing job, but I lose my entire annual bonus. I lose everything." He was out there for 10 minutes. When he came back in, the rage was gone, replaced by a slimy, manufactured charm. He sat down opposite me, leaning forward, trying to seem sincere. "Mum, this has all gone too far," he said, attempting a smile. "Let's fix this. I've already put a deposit on a very nice 1-bedroom apartment for you, near the senior center. We can call off these lawyers. I'll even transfer a little money to your account, just to make things, you know, pretty." I looked at him. At this man who thought my dignity, my home of 30 years, and my entire life could be fixed with a 1-bedroom apartment and pretty money. I said nothing. I just shook my head. Once. His control snapped. He slammed his fist down on the table, a sudden, violent crack that made me flinch. The force of it knocked over his old coffee mug, the one I hadn't washed, and a wave of cold, dark coffee washed over the original eviction notice. We both watched the stain spread. It looked like old blood. He was breathing hard, his eyes bulging. I looked up from the ruined paper and met his gaze. My voice was ice. "You really thought I would choose the money over my self-respect," I said. "That just proves you never knew me at all." Alicia moved faster than I could have imagined. Within a week, she had the full file from North Lake Community Credit Union. She called me back to her office in Fairmont and laid the papers out. "It's worse than we thought." "Margaret," she said, tapping a document. "He didn't just take out one loan. He refinanced this house twice in the last 3 years." She showed me the signature pages. Both bore my forged name. Both had been notarized. "The notary," Alicia said, "is an employee named Julia Vance. A little digging shows she went to high school with Daniel and works the same branch he uses for his Northbridge business accounts. They're friends on social media." But that wasn't the big twist. Alicia slid another file across the desk. This one from Riverside Memorial Hospital. This is your admission and discharge packet from your second surgery. It includes detailed logs. And this, she pointed to a line, is from the medical tracking system. It confirms your location. On the exact date and time of the second, larger refinancing, you were not at the North Lake Bank branch. You were physically located in the post-operative recovery wing, floor 4, room 412. The air left my lungs. It was an alibi, cold and perfect, written in medical charts. This is no longer a he said, she said case. Alicia explained, her voice firm. This isn't a civil dispute over a family misunderstanding. Under Ohio state law, knowingly using an elder's assets, especially by fraudulent means like forgery while they are incapacitated, is financial elder abuse. It's a felony. Criminal. Felony. The words were back, sharper this time. The choice was suddenly, brutally clear. I could tell Alicia to stop. I could use this evidence as a threat, leverage a small settlement out of Daniel, and let him walk away, saving him from ruin. Or I could let her proceed. I could push the button that would send my son's life into a freefall. He would be charged. He would be fired from Northbridge Data Solutions. He would have a criminal record. I sat there, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. I thought about the night shifts, all those years, after Sam left, when I worked as a part-time accountant during the day and then stocked shelves at the local supermarket from 10p to 2a. I did it to pay for Daniel's college tuition. I did it so he wouldn't have loans. I remembered the times I'd covered his rent in his first apartment, lying to the landlord for him when he was short, protecting him. My entire life had been a series of sacrifices, a one-way street of kindness, and I had done it so well that I had successfully raised a man who saw me as nothing more than a final obstacle to be liquidated. I looked up at Alicia. I've protected him my whole life, I said, my voice thick but steady. Every time he fell, I was there to catch him. It seems, this time, I need to protect myself from him. If the law says this is a crime, then let the law call it a crime. Alicia nodded, a grim, respectful look on her face. I will prepare a summary of these findings and send them to the Brookridge County Prosecutor's Office. We'll request they open a criminal investigation parallel to our civil suit for your residency. As if to seal the decision, Alicia's assistant buzzed. Leo was in the lobby. He'd brought the file. He'd transferred the audio from his phone to a USB drive, as Alicia had requested. We listened to it right there in the office. Daniel's voice, clear and cold. Once I get Evans to sign the mental papers, she has no voice. Alicia clicked off the audio. Well, she said, that perfectly paints the picture of intent. That night, I had to do one of the hardest things yet. I had to prepare for the fallout. I called my cousin Shirley, down in Florida. She's the only family I have left who I speak to. She's the one who always told me I was too soft on Daniel. I told her everything. The eviction, the forgery, the lawyer, the prosecutor. I waited for her to tell me I was a terrible mother, that I was destroying my own family. There was a long pause on the line. Then Shirley's crackly voice came through. Margaret, she said, you should have done this 10 years ago. I hung up and felt a strange, cold peace. Later that evening, I sat on my sofa in the dark. The television was off. I looked around the room, at the shadows that were my oldest companions. I thought about what was coming. I thought about the trial, the whispers, the look on Daniel's face. If I have to lose my son to save myself, I whispered to the empty room. This time, I choose myself. You can't keep something like a prosecutor's investigation quiet in a town the size of Brookridge. It doesn't leak all at once, just in whispers. But those whispers, about elder abuse and a pending case, eventually found their way to the right ear. One afternoon, a young woman knocked on my door. She was holding a notebook and a press badge from Mid-State Watch, our local news channel. Her name was Janelle. She asked, very politely, if I was the homeowner. Then she asked if I would be willing to be interviewed, anonymously, for a special report she was doing. The topic, she said, was a growing trend of adult children using legal loopholes to evict aging parents, often to cover their own debts. My first instinct was to shut the door. No, thank you, I said, my hand tightening on the knob. I don't know what you're talking about. I started to close it, but she didn't move. Ma'am, she said, her voice dropping the professional tone. I'm doing this story because I watched my own uncles force my grandmother to sell her house. They told her it was for her own good. They put her in a high-end facility, sold the farm, and split the money. She died 6 months later in a room that smelled like bleach. I stopped. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the genuine old anger in her eyes. My story wasn't just my own. I opened the door. The segment aired 2 nights later. Janelle was a good editor. My face was blurred, my voice slightly altered. They didn't use my name, but they used a long shot of the house, taken from the street. They didn't show the number, but anyone in Brookridge would recognize the house on the corner with the white-painted porch and the overgrown rose bushes. The fallout was immediate. Kelsey, apparently, was at a work function for her marketing firm, Brightline Creative. Her phone lit up with text messages from colleagues. Just saw the Mid-State report. That looked like your neighborhood. Are you okay? Terrible story. Thinking of you. She knew, instantly, that her carefully crafted image was under attack. As Leo later reported, she came home in a blind panic, screaming at Daniel that he had let this go too far, and that this was going to destroy her career. Daniel, meanwhile, got his own message. It was a sterile internal email from the Human Resources Department at Northbridge Data Solutions. It was a general reminder. It said that the company had resources to support any employees going through personal difficulties. It ended with a polite but firm sentence, hoping that no private matters would be allowed to affect the company's public-facing image. It wasn't an accusation, it was a threat. His management job, the one that paid for the new SUV, was now dangling by a thread. And then, the neighbours, people I had only ever waved to. Mrs. Collins from 3 doors down brought over a blueberry pie. Mr. Henderson, who always complains about my leaves, dropped a card in my mailbox that just said, "We stand with you." Small, quiet gestures. I put the cards in a woven basket on my dining table. Daniel came that night. It was late, past 11. He didn't use his key this time. He pounded on the door. When I opened it, he looked terrible. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a rumpled hoodie and jeans. His hair was uncombed, and his eyes were bloodshot with exhaustion and fury. "How could you?" he hissed, pushing past me into the entryway. "How could you go on television to smear your own family, to humiliate me and Kelsey?" I didn't back up. I just stood in the hall. I didn't use any names. Daniel, I didn't have to. They knew, He shouted. HR knew Kelsey's boss knew you've ruined us. I didn't ruin you, I said, and the coldness in my own voice surprised me. Your actions told a story. I just stopped being silent about it. If you didn't want to be the son who evicts his mother, you shouldn't have been the son who evicts his mother. He had no answer for that. He just stared at me, his chest heaving. And finally, he just turned and slammed the door behind him. Later, Janelle sent me a private link to the clip. I sat alone in my kitchen, the house dark, and watched it on my laptop. I listened to my own disguised voice tell a blurred, anonymous version of my shame. They had kept one line, right at the end. Silence was my way of erasing myself, my voice said, clear and steady. I've done that long enough. Leo started coming by almost every day, his old laptop tucked under his arm. He'd sit at my dining room table, the one I had threatened to throw out, and plug in the scanner I'd bought him for the task. He claimed he was studying for his community college finals, but he was really our chief archivist. He scanned every utility bill, every property tax receipt from the last 20 years, every hospital record. He uploaded them all to a secure cloud folder. He showed me the icon on his screen. He had named it, simply, House War. My dining room, with its chipped paint and faded floral wallpaper, had become the headquarters for my own quiet resistance. Daniel must have seen his son's car. One evening, I watched from the kitchen window as Daniel's grey SUV pulled up, blocking Leo's sedan in the driveway. Daniel got out, his suit jacket off, but his tie still tight. He cornered Leo on the front lawn. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the gestures, Daniel jabbing his finger, Leo standing his ground but looking small. When Leo came inside a few minutes later, his face was pale, but his eyes were hard. He told me Daniel had accused him of betraying the family and had delivered a final, cruel ultimatum: stop helping me, or the college tuition money would be cut off. Effective immediately. Daniel didn't know that Leo, anticipating the fight, had hit the audio record button on his phone as he walked outside. His voice shook when he played it for me, but his words to his father were firm. It's not right, Dad. What you're doing is not right. 2 days later, the main offensive came. Daniel and Kelsey. They showed up at my door, not in their usual power suits, but in soft weekend clothes, jeans, and sweaters. They were trying to look like family. They brought a bakery pie. They sat on my sofa, Kelsey perched on the edge, Daniel leaning forward with his hands clasped, projecting a theatre of sincerity. They wanted to reconcile. They were so sorry for the stress. They had a new offer. They named a dollar amount, a significant one, far larger than before. It was enough to buy a small condo, enough to live on for years. All I had to do was sign one small document. They said, a legal affidavit confirming that my original transfer of the house 5 years ago was voluntary and that I was dropping all pending legal actions. I let the offer hang in the silence of the room. I let them watch me. Then, I stood up, walked to my desk, and pulled out a single sheet of paper from a plastic sleeve. It was Sam's old, handwritten draft of a will. I placed it on the coffee table between us. Do you recognize your father's handwriting, Daniel? He stared at it, frowning, confused. But Kelsey, who had once worked as an intern at a law firm, leaned in. Her eyes scanned the page, and her face went tight. She knew what it was. It wasn't a legal document. Not really. But Sam's scrawl was clear. and so was the date, and the signature of the witness, our old pastor from the Brookridge Chapel. She saw the line I had underlined my right to lifetime residency in this house. She understood, instantly, its value in a courtroom. It wasn't a law, it was a motive. It painted a picture of Daniel not just as a greedy son, but as one who was actively defying the clear, dying wishes of his own father. "I'm not signing your paper," I said, my voice flat. "I'm not interested in your money." I pointed at the draft will. He may have left me, but even he knew this house was my life. The only document I will sign is a court order, issued by a judge, granting me permanent, legal right to live here until I die. I am not for sale. Daniel's practiced calm shattered. He jumped to his feet. "Do you even understand what you're doing?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "You are destroying my future. You are destroying Leo's future. That money is his college fund." He was no longer looking at his mother. He was looking at an obstacle. I stood up. 2. "You destroyed your future, Daniel. When you forged my name on a loan, you destroyed it when you decided I was a business expense to be liquidated. As for Leo," I said, my voice dropping into a cold, clear calm. "Leo is building his future. He's building it by choosing to stand up for what's right, instead of what's easy." They left empty-handed, Kelsey dragging a stunned, silent Daniel by the arm. The pie was still on the table. The moment the door closed, I called Alicia. I sent her the audio file of Daniel threatening Leo on the lawn. I sent her a scan of Sam's handwritten will. I heard a sharp intake of breath on her end, followed by a low, satisfied chuckle. "Margaret," she said, "they just handed us the rest of the bullets we need." Later that night, my phone lit up with a text. It was from Leo. "I don't know what's going to happen with me and Dad after this, but I know I don't want to be him." I held the phone for a long time before I set it down, the screen glowing in the dark. The main hearing took place at the Brookridge County Courthouse. The room was old, smelling of floor wax and old paper. The wooden benches, polished by decades of grief and conflict, creaked every time someone shifted their weight. I wore my best dark blue cardigan and clutched my accordion folder, the one now stuffed with yellow sticky notes, each one a piece of my defense. The judge assigned to us was a man named Robert Langley. He looked to be in his mid-50s, with a tired face but eyes that were sharp and missed nothing. He had the air of a man who was thoroughly accustomed to messy divorces and property line disputes, but perhaps not this specific, quiet venom of financial elder abuse. Alicia Moreno went first. She laid out the case with methodical, cold precision. She described the transfer of the house, my physical state at the time, and my total reliance on the information Daniel provided. Then she detailed the years that followed, where I, and I alone, paid every single bill required to maintain the property. One by one, the evidence was presented, the stacks of utility bills, the $10,000 receipt for the new roof I'd paid for in cash, my surgical records from Riverside Memorial, and finally, Sam's handwritten, unfinished will. "These items," Alicia said to the judge, "paint a clear picture. This was not an unconditional gift. This was a woman's life, her home, which she continued to maintain as her own." Then it was their turn. Daniel's lawyer, a slick man in a suit that cost more than my car, was provided by the bank's insurance. His argument was brutally simple. Daniel Holloway was the sole legal owner of the property. What he did with that property, including mortgaging it, was his legal right. He was, the lawyer argued, merely caring for his mother's financial future by trying to move her to a more appropriate setting. Daniel was called to the stand. He was composed, wearing his best Northbridge Data Solutions suit. He looked credible, concerned. But then Alicia began her cross-examination. "Mr. Holloway," she asked, her voice calm, "did you inform your mother of the second mortgage you took out on the home?" Daniel shifted in his seat. No. It was my property. I didn't see the need." "And did you," Alicia continued, "contact your mother's physician, Dr. Evans, to suggest he evaluate her cognitive abilities?" Daniel's face tightened. "I was concerned about her. I did suggest he might want to check on her." "I see." Alicia paused, then looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to play a piece of audio. It was obtained by a witness and speaks directly to Mr. Holloway's concern for his mother's well-being." Daniel's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, hearsay, illegal recording. It was recorded in a common area where the defendant had no expectation of privacy, Your Honor." Alicia countered smoothly. "And it is being offered as evidence of motive and attitude." Judge Langley looked at Daniel, then at Alicia. "Overruled. I'll allow it." Alicia pressed a key on her laptop. The courtroom went silent. And then, Daniel's voice, tinny and sharp with anger, filled the room. "It doesn't matter what she wants. Once I get Evans to sign the mental papers, she has no voice. It's done." A collective, quiet gasp went through the room. Daniel went ashen, his mask of the caring son vaporizing in an instant. Daniel's lawyer was speechless. Judge Langley leaned forward, staring at Daniel over the top of his glasses. He let the silence hang for a full 10 seconds. "You call this caring for your mother, Mr. Holloway?" The final witness was Leo. He walked to the stand, his hands shaking, his hoodie looking entirely out of place. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. He told the court about the years he'd heard his father promise me. "You can stay here as long as you want, Mum." Then he told them about the threat. "My father? He told me he would cut off my college tuition," Leo said, his voice cracking. "If I continued to help my grandma, if I continued to stand on her side." When he was done, Judge Langley looked exhausted. He looked down at the piles of paper, my hospital records, the forged signature on the Northlake loan, the evidence of my payments. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "The court will recess," he announced. "I need to review this entire file, particularly the exhibits relating to the mortgages. We will reconvene at 2 p. for a final ruling." The gavel cracked. I stood up, my legs feeling like they might not hold me. I walked out of the courtroom, my heart pounding against my ribs, ready for whatever came next. When court reconvened at 2 p., the air in the room was so thick you could barely breathe. Daniel looked haggard, his suit rumpled. Kelsey was sitting 2 rows behind him, staring at her phone, her face pale. I was certain she was watching for emails from her company's legal department. Judge Langley put on his glasses and read from his notes in a slow, measured monotone. He acknowledged that the original deed transfer, on paper, was technically legal and had happened too many years ago to be fully reversed. "But," he said, stopping and looking directly at Daniel, "the court found substantial evidence of undue influence and a profound abuse of trust." And then, the main judgment. He ruled that I, Margaret Holloway, was granted a legal life tenant right to the Brookridge property. It was official. I had lifetime residency. Daniel was forbidden from selling, refinancing, or attempting to evict me from the home without my explicit, notarized, written consent. I felt Alicia squeeze my hand, but the judge wasn't finished. This was the retaliation. This was the twist that mattered. Judge Langley announced that, based on the evidence of forgery and the clear intent to defraud an elder, he was referring the entire file, the forged signatures, the audio recordings, the hospital records, to the Brookridge County Prosecutor's Office to explore the possibility of criminal charges against Daniel Holloway and the involved notary at Northlake Community Credit Union. Criminal charges. When Daniel heard those words, he shot up from his seat as if electricity had hit him. "Your Honor, he began, but his slick lawyer grabbed the back of his suit jacket and yanked him back down, whispering fiercely in his ear. Daniel's face was white. He was staring at the judge, but I don't think he was seeing him. He was seeing, for the very first time, the real, catastrophic consequences of his own choices. Judge Langley added one last thing. He ordered that Daniel must reimburse me for all major repairs I had paid for on the house for the last 10 years. The money would be taken as a lien, paid out from the estate's profit if the house was ever sold after I had passed away, or if I chose, on my own, to leave. Outside the courtroom, Janelle, the reporter from Midstate Watch, was waiting by the elevator, her cameraman beside her. She rushed forward, microphone out. "Mrs. Holloway, what does this mean for you?" I didn't stop, but I paused just long enough to look her in the eye. "Today," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the marble hall, "the law reminded everyone of a simple thing: a mother is not an asset to be liquidated." I turned and walked away, letting her write the rest of the story herself. When I got home, the house felt different. It felt like mine again. I went through every room and pulled open every curtain, letting the late afternoon sun flood the old floors. I went to the kitchen wall. I took down the original eviction notice. I put it in a new manila folder, and right on top of it, I placed the new, red-stamped court order. I wrote a label on the tab, "What I Never Forget." Leo came by an hour later. He didn't say anything. He just walked in and gave me a long, tight hug that I desperately needed. He confirmed what the fallout looked like. Daniel had already received a formal email from Northbridge Data Solutions. He was on temporary, unpaid suspension, pending investigation, and Kelsey was retaining her own lawyer. Not Daniel's. Her own. The alliance was broken. That night, I sat on my porch swing. The air was cool, smelling of old wood and the wildflowers that grew by the fence. I listened to the sound of cars on the distant highway. I didn't feel giddy. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no joy in watching my son's life implode. But I did feel quiet. A deep, solid quiet. My victory wasn't his ruin. My victory was that, for the first time in my life, my future was not going to be decided by the greed or the carelessness of another person. The anger I had deferred, the rage I had kept locked under my ribs that first day, had finally arrived. It wasn't a scream. It was a court order, permanent and official, defining my place in the world. Thank you for listening to my story. Please comment below where you're tuning in from so we can connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard.